Hello to everybody tuning in online and who are here tonight. I'm really excited to be here with you, Halle. I have such a big crush on this book, to be honest. And what I wanted to kind of talk about or start off talking about is the fact that both of us are kind of here in conversation through our debuts, right? Yes. And remembering the kind of wildness that was putting out a debut, the joy, but also kind of for me, the terror that came with that, right? I was wondering, how do you feel now that the debut is in the world?
Well, I think it was Susan Cain who wrote this book called Quiet and another book called Bittersweet. And she said when her debut book came out, she felt embarrassed. And I think for a few days, I thought, why did I ever want to do this with my life? And I need to hide forever. And I think now I feel overwhelmingly humbled and so much gratitude, and I do feel proud. So I'm just excited. It's almost been a month, and I think people are connecting with it, and it's really powerful when I get to hear that readers see themselves. So it's been more than I could have imagined so far.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what about the book makes you feel proud? If we're like, for thinking about the different ways that we kind of learn to become proud of our books, right? Because there is that, for me, there was maybe that embarrassment, that terror, right? But then eventually learning to become proud of the book. And maybe that's thinking about how many people are willing to hold the book, to recognize themselves in that. Maybe it's that sense of completion of finally having a project done, right? But I'm really like, what's the thing that makes you feel proud about it now?
Well, I'm coming up on turning 30, and I started this book 6-7 years ago. So it took me all of my 20s to write it. And so there's just a sense of satisfaction for me, because I feel like maybe there's one thing in my 20s that I spent my time wisely on. That was writing this book. Yeah, I think just believing that the book was worth my time. I don't always know that. For me, especially as a Black woman writer, I had to battle up against, like, am I worth doing this? So there's where some of the good feelings come from. I think too, this is 12 stories about 12 Black women, predominantly from Appalachia. And that's where I'm from. That's where my family's been for generations. And I got to tell those stories my way. And that is just endlessly enough. I don't really know if I would have had another opportunity to do that. So the timing just felt really aligned for me with this book. Yeah.
I love what you're saying about time, thinking about the time that you've kind of put into the work, right? And I think that for me, the greatest evidence of reading Good Woman is the time, right? I think that there is a substantial amount of care for all of the women who appear in these stories. And you can tell through the ways that you use detail work, through the ways that you build voice. I know voice is something that you've said in previous interviews that you're really interested in when you're kind of composing a story, right? And I think that you have your thumb on the pulse of the voices in this book, right? And so I really admire that. And I think just in general, if you could talk to me a little bit about how you kind of define a voice, what does that look like? Even if you want to talk through the lens of like one of the characters already in the book, right? What did finding their voice and creating their voice look like for you?
I love this question. I think one of the things that was so delightful in crafting the voice was that maybe 10 to 20% of this is real voices I knew or know, especially I think thinking of my grandmothers, my great grandmothers, my great aunts. Just a shout out to my Aunt Dolly. She is really excited about the book, and she's in her 70s and lives in Chicago, and she is making me a scarf to keep me warm for the rest of my tour. So she is the ultimate good woman. But when I think about voice, I'm thinking always like about honoring, preserving, moving away from caricature, and removing shame. So a lot of the characters in my story wrestle with internal shame, but I knew as a promise I kept to myself and to them in this book, like, you will not be shamed with me, even when you're making really difficult choices. So there's that kind of the voice of me as the writer, but then I'm thinking specifically of the voice of the young woman, I think is it Crystal, or thinking of the girl who's in The Truth About Gators.
Nikki,
thank you. Her voice is really difficult to write because she is equal parts smart and self-destructive. And so I knew that in writing about her traumas and her victories and her revenge, she needed to have a voice that was subtle and funny, devastating, but also absurd in a way. So I just tried, and I also read a lot of poetry. Poetry helped me with voice in the collection.
Oh, I love that. Okay, to kind of like give everybody a little bit of a sample of like who Nikki is and her unique voice and all of the kind of complicated assets that shape that voice, right? I love that you kind of pointed out shame, humor, right? Thinking about recovery from trauma, all of these things feel really beautifully wrapped up in Nikki. Do you think you can read a sample of The Truth About Gators for us?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. So just a little bit about this story. It follows a young woman who is kind of trying to grapple with an act of violence or multiple acts of violence that have been committed against her, her body, and her personhood. And so after a long time of repression, she kind of gets her sense of self-defense back and ends up having a return act of violence on someone who has been really her abuser. And so this is a little bit from The Truth About Gators. I am on a journey ever since I gently stabbed Mr. Jimmy at the barbecue last month. See, his baby toe kept hanging out the front side of his gator sandals, the nail buttery and curved under like an old orange peel. And I sat there staring at him in my misery and remembered all the times he found me after church in the parlor growing up, and the times in the vestibule after service, and I guess the times in the women's bathroom on the 3rd floor too. Every Sunday at Brunswick Eternal Harvest Pentecostal went the same. I looked at his feet while he switched over to me and my mother. Erlene, don't you look so heavenly, so fine? Oh, Jimmy, she'd sigh as they hugged in a saintly way, her arms making an A-frame above his bald, dark head, then settling on his shoulders. Her chest always grazed his thin, faded glory dress shirt, her nipples hard, alert. Then she pinched my side and scooted me to him for a hug. Come here, baby girl, he'd always say, smelling like dollar store Jacquard Noir. And I'd stand there stiff as a board, my eyes in a soft raged glare, my body all too familiar with his puncture. Mr. Jimmy always hugged me too long, his mouth smelling like mothballs above me, his crotch resting like a mound of wet cotton balls against the whole of me. On the day of the cookout, he really irked me. At 23 years old, I thought I was grown enough to let it go. It only happened 7 times. And besides, my anger with him stunted me from my blessing. But Jimmy still irked me. He was a ghost slip on my body. He scratched the silver naps at the back of his head with his pointer fingernail, and I watched his skin fall like ash on his shoulders. We had gone all out. New York strips we bought 2 for $1 at the Food Lion. Jimmy said he'd fix them right for us. When I first saw the danger flakes, I was sure he'd wash his hands, sure he'd scrape the gunk out somehow. The white cottage cheese looking shit sat thick on the underside of his long rounded nail. But he didn't scrape. He didn't dust his hands off on his pants. He reached over the grill with his bare hands and flipped the meat, then licked his lips at me. So I lost it, clawed an ice pick from an igloo cooler, and made a few indentions on him. I don't remember much else after, but now I see Rabbi Cadence. The health department is 2 doors down, a woman tells me, of the community center, 1 door over from the synagogue. I stare at her and the edges of her lace front wig, and I wonder if she buys her hair from the Asian store on Magnolia like me. I'm here for therapy. I need her to know I am responsible, as this was my only sensible option. I keep myself accountable, either 12 sessions or the hospital. She blinks twice. I ask if she knows where Rabbi Caden's office is. I ask the white way, changing my voice to upper middle class, NPR style, vocal fry, bright A's. I can just hear morning edition. Shorter vowels, tightness on the T's. I try to show I am in college and can count. She gives a no teeth smile and points behind her. I smile with all my teeth and gums. See, I have them all, and walk quickly. I worry I smell like cocoa butter.
Can we just like applaud for that, please?
Yeah.
I'm like really excited that you picked that section because there's so much that opens up right in that section that not only speaks to I think the ways that you're developing voice with Nikki, developing some of that humor, and also just really paying keen attention to what she pays attention to, right? But also I really admire all of the other connections that kind of get opened up thematically in that moment. But before I kind of traverse down that road, can we just talk about that really gross buttery fingernail, like that toenail, please?
Yes,
right? Because it's such a horrifying detail, right? It's so gross, but also hilarious,
right?
Like the first time I read that, I think I actually busted out laughing, right? Because I mean, first off, that toenail is so vivid, right? And it's the strangeness of the focus on that moment, right? But then the way that the story sort of reveals why that would be the focus, right? And it makes so much sense, and it really does like develop a kind of subtle insight into Nikki and her kind of relationship to that trauma and how it's sort of like building up in her, right? Can you talk a little bit more about like the focus on that buttery toenail, please?
I can. I have a fun story about it, and then we can talk more seriously. The toenail and the orange peel is actually from my own grossness. I have a habit of leaving out cutie tangerine orange peel skins, and like I will be absolutely neurotic about cleaning something up in my house, but then I have this feral habit of just letting my orange peels curl up. And so when I was writing this story, I was genuinely looking around and being like, well, that's pretty gross. And that feels toe-like to me. I don't know. But I think more specifically, in the light studying I did about trauma in the body for this, focusing on things that are actually not the cause or direct focus of what has traumatized a person, that's probably not the physical part of Reggie's body that hurt Nikki, but I don't know if she can really register where that pain, where she was harmed from him. So that foot gives her a place to direct it. And it also is so representative of her disgust for him. And it also kind of speaks about his moralness in a way, like using that toe as a way to say like he's this nasty on the inside too. So and I think I wanted to also just show how trauma can just rob you of something. Nikki is kind of flailing through life and struggling, but she's clearly bright, she's clearly observant, she clearly is really seeing the world, but she's like under this veil of her assault. And so it just makes sense to put all of them together. And also just the idea of gators. I don't know if y'all know what gators are, if you've seen them, but they're very popular. I don't know, how would you describe them? I don't know.
That's a great question. Kind of boxy, shiny, they're tragically gaudy. I only ever see them on like men who are like 50s and above, and also like they're the kind of like hideous church shoe.
They are a hideous church shoe. Right? Sometimes I feel a little sinister depending on the man who's wearing them. And so and somehow I just feel like all of that was talking together: the toenail, the gator shoe, the type of man that this man is. And I just really needed that detail to carry the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So powerful. And I really love too the toenail, the gators, how all of this is really wrapped up in Mr. Jimmy's like moralness, right? And I think there is so much about moralness that is being teased out in this story, in this book, right? In the invocation of good women, right? And like this is a situation in which Nikki, you know, like stabs Mr. Jimmy, right? And when we think about the limitations of our idea of goodness, right, we can't necessarily call that a good act, right? But the story seems to be very purposefully digging into our ideas of goodness and challenging goodness. How do you think Nikki relates to goodness?
I think she's one of the only probably good people in the story, but the problem is that she's so flooded by shame, she can't see her own goodness. And so that is kind of what's propelling her to make really complicated decisions. And I think she even says in the story when she's dancing with this Colorado smelling cheesy bed sheet man, that he's her one good thing. And she's looking to hang on to that. And sometimes she has this incredible innocence about her, this purity. And even in her observations, they're so pure. She appreciates the natural world. And so I think she's just desperately needing someone to just let her know that she's good. And she has no valuable or reliable mirrors to tell her that. So that's why I think for that question.
I think hearing you say that really makes me think a lot more about the sort of resolutions of your stories, right? And stories that are so driven by voice, right? The kind of endings that we might expect a short story to have doesn't really seem like the case here. It doesn't seem like the kind of ending we need, right? And so I'm thinking about what you're saying about Nikki's relationship with shame, and I'm thinking about how so much of her engagement with shame is like reaching outward and trying to find other people to erase that shame for her, right? And so when I think about the ending of Truth of Gator, about Gators, right? And I'm trying to be like very loose and not spoilery about like what goes down, right? So that we can enjoy that for ourselves, right? But how do you see Nikki's relationship with her own shame changing as she kind of goes forward? Do you see it changing?
I don't know if I see it changing. And that's a sad thing for me as a writer, because I knew that that was where her story ended, with her just wrestling. And sometimes I would think like, I didn't just want to write traumatic Black stories. And so that's why there's a lot of Black joy in the collection. There's Black humor, sometimes Black silliness. But I also wanted to honor for so many of us who we have parts of our lives that do not get resolved. And I just did not think it would be authentic. I don't know if Nikki's relationship to shame changes. I do think, unfortunately or fortunately, she's sobering up. Right. Like, I think there is a little bit of a turn at the end of the story where she's starting to see like, what would life be without fantasy and without just succumbing into misery? She has a little bit of clarity. So that's what I'd say for that.
And I do think there is a bit of hope in that. I think that, again, if we're looking for a resolution that's like deeply rooted in some kind of change, right, then you're kind of missing the point of that story, right? And so I really do, I love the ways that you kind of cultivate endings for so many of these characters and how so many of these endings are so unexpected, right? In which case, how do you know when a story is finished, just in general? Like, where do you get this sense of like, if there is no actual change that can be made here, right? And I agree that a change would have been premature for Nikki at that point, right? How do you know then that the story in this moment is done?
I have one crafty technical answer and then one woo-woo answer. So we'll do the woo-woo last. I have a very Asheville answer, and I can say that I used to live here. But for the first thing, I really like what Kimberly King Parsons says. She wrote a great collection called Black Light. She has another book coming out next spring, I think. She, in some interview I read, I hope it's her, she talks about how every sentence has to, is creating a promise to the next one. And so each sentence has to kind of be following through for the next one. So you're really thinking about like your sense of economy in a story or in a poem, and just a follow through. So I think naturally a story just ends because a couple promises just kind of run out, if that makes sense. I also, when I start to feel bored, I start to think it's time to wrap it up, or maybe I don't know where my intention is going in this story. And so I had a graduate advisor who really challenged me when I wrote my thesis, which became this book. If you can't tell me what your story is about in 2 sentences, you don't know what it's about. I kind of believe him. The woo-woo thing is that when a story is done, I genuinely have a sense of body satisfaction. What I mean by that is like my body settles, maybe I get chill bumps, like somatically, I just feel good. Even if it's a sad story, I feel like relief. So sometimes it's just my body helping me.
I really love that body. I mean, honestly, body satisfaction feels right to me, right? Because it ultimately is just, I think it's maybe representative of this sort of spiritual connection that you build with the work, right? I think there's, again, even in the ways that you kind of talk about Nikki as a character in this moment, right? There's so much care and intimacy that opens up in the crafting of these characters and these voices and learning to listen to these voices, right? And I really love and admire that. And so when you say that it's kind of like this bodily kind of satisfaction, that makes sense, right? So much of these characters feel like they kind of live in me, even as a reader, right? When I walk away from this book. So that makes sense to me. I want to kind of double back a little bit and kind of think a little bit more about Mr. Jimmy and his relationship to moralness, right? And in particular, how many of the interactions of harm between Mr. Jimmy and Nikki happen in the church, right? And I think that religion is a thing that kind of pops up periodically throughout Good Women, right? And religion doesn't always perform in positive lights and positive venues in the lives of these characters, right? Can you speak a little bit more about the ways in which you see Christianity intersecting with either the truth about gators or even some of the other stories that kind of happen here, right? I know later on How to Cut and Quarter, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I think in The Truth About Gators, religion is playing an interesting role. It's in reinforcing respectability politics. It's this kind of observant kind of doom and gloom presence that Nikki feels where she can't measure up. But Nikki is giving mystic to me, if you ask me. And sometimes I think that she's having her own spiritual experiences and the little things that she sees that she appreciates. So there's also some of that in there. But I think religion is holding community together in this story. It's also harming her, and it's keeping her trapped. She's well into her 20s and she feels like she can't miss a service. She even has a little bit of prosperity gospel thinking where she's like, I can just get over this. I will not be stunted in my blessing anymore. And so I think she is deeply hoping, like, if I just pray and stay quiet, I will move past it. And unfortunately, that is not a resolve. And if I can get theological here for a moment, I don't think that the God of this book or the God that maybe she's hoping to be in relationship with, it requires that, you know. So she's wrestling with that. And The Truth About Gators, the young woman Marjorie, she actually has a revelation at the end of the story. And I don't want to give away too much, but she truly has like an Exodus vision in a way. And I really enjoyed writing that. So I think a lot of these women are moved and touched beyond life. And they're also deeply harmed by religion. And I wanted to write about that with sensitivity, because I am equal parts and very sensitive and protective of religious people, especially those from the community I grew up in. But I also think there's space to say religion harms a lot of people. Christianity harms a lot of people, especially Black people. But then a lot of people find release in that too. And so I think you can't talk about one side without the other.
I really love what you said about Nikki kind of like coming into her own blessings, essentially, right? And for just kind of give a quick like synopsis for those who haven't read How to Cut and Quarter, which is like the last story in the book. Marjorie is the main character, and her father has passed away in an accident. And her father used to be a pastor when he was alive, right? And she's, of course, reckoning with the grief of that, reckoning with the distance that she often kind of felt between her and her father when he was alive, right? And reckoning with the secrets that he sort of leaves behind. And that's all I will say about that, right? But what I love about Marjorie, what I love about Nikki, what I love about Shauna, and I'm mentioning characters in different kind of short stories, right, is all of the ways in which these women seem to be reckoning with their own agency, right? Defining that, trying to shape what that is. And that was the thing that felt like the most palpable connection between you and me and our work. There's a lot of connections, right? I'm mad excited about that. I'm not gonna lie, right? I feel so excited.
I'm a little like, what?
That's right. I was kind of, as I was thinking through and looking at these stories, I was kind of like shook by how many of my poems felt like they were also connected to these stories. I was like, maybe this is a Nikki poem, maybe this is a Shauna, you know, like it was great. But like thinking about that agency, thinking about that felt so tied into that Good Women title for me, right? Because there's a lot of ways in which goodness can be like this force that divides us from our own power too, right? This expectation to adhere to a particular kind of goodness. So for me, when I see Nikki sort of wrestling with at the end, it seems to me like she's wrestling with a kind of goodness and defining goodness for herself and what that can be outside of how we define it. In which case, right, let's like talk a little bit about agency and let's talk, do you want to continue talking about it and Truth About Gators? Do you want to, there's so many stories we can shift gears and talk about here.
We may have to talk about skin hunger a little bit, but then also I really hope that you'll read us a poem too.
Okay, yes.
So can we maybe pause and have you do that?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe a skin hunger feeling poem?
Okay, yes, I can definitely do a skin hunger feeling poem, right? So what I'll do is I'm going to read a poem from Mother Body here. And as I was thinking about skin hunger, I was thinking about ways and kind of like a self-erasure, right? That this desire for like intimacy and connection and the kind of self-erasure that kind of goes into that, right? I really wanted to kind of unpack that. So this is, my ex-boyfriend is a dick joke. And I want to tell you that now he makes love. Each low moan eroding a gravelly note in his throat, but he used to fuck in pools and cars and backyards dotted with icy stars until the neighbors made spectacles of our bodies. Now he's all wiped with generic white girl names, Mary, Beth, and Jane, and they don't like it when you yank their hips, make milk duds of their nipples. Did they moan too when he said he couldn't split their clit because his nose too sensitive? Dirty girl, I make shame fit good. I wear it skin tight. I admit that I was wild for him so I would finally be worth something. Dirty girl, I like to slide told me more than once when I tried to smash his lily lips to silence. The joke is he doesn't have a cock these days. He makes love, but I was dirty girl. I was generic black girl name. I was galaxy porn star. I was punchline. Every ounce of me. I used to dye my hair cerulean for lust. Used to pretend the dark don't cut out only one of us.
Okay, thank you.
So like thinking about it kind of,
I'm sorry, we gotta take a pause. Powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stunning. amazing.
Thank you. That means so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. So thinking about, obviously, like that's playing a lot with like sex and the kind of sexual dynamics that kind of happen there, right? And I think for Shauna, a lot of the power dynamics in her relationship are also rooted in sex, right? So do you want to kind of offer like a brief synopsis of what Skin Hunger is about, so that we can kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yes. Do you want me to talk about it?
I could do it.
Yes,
I'm happy to
please
do it.
please do.
Okay. Okay. So I'm very excited to talk about Skin Hunger because I made my students read this. It's that damn good. So essentially, Shauna is in an interracial relationship, marriage with this man named John. And John is all of the embodiments of waspness that kind of it comes with that, right? Just wealthy, completely oblivious. There's a kind of episode with blackface. His mom is just a tragic and terrible, and even his sister is also terrible. Right. And John desperately wants to have a child, but what he doesn't know is that Shauna is still taking birth control. Right. And there's this kind of tension in that. But in particular, the ways that John almost uses sex as a means of controlling Shauna. Right. Because he the way that he treats her, the focus on like having this child, it really kind of situates her into something akin to like breeding, right?
Yes.
And the story even says that, right? She says, I feel like a breeding cow, right? And so thinking about that connection, the relationship between sex and control, but also sex and agency, right? Felt really wrapped up in that poem that I just read, but also in Skin Hunger, right? Yeah. Which kind of brings us to Neil a little bit. And I don't want to give too much about Neil, but things happen with Neil, right? That makes me bring that idea of like sex and agency into question, right? How do you see agency kind of manifesting as a struggle for Shauna?
Well, I think she's up against a really like a mountain of difficulty. She is trying to navigate this white world with her white husband. And so she is another young woman in this collection who's incredibly resourceful. I think her issue is that she also sees a struggle here because she also has some agency in being close to these white people, or at least she thinks she does. She has a cushy life. She has money. She can do whatever she wants. It's giving a very Lululemon life, but she's also tremendously suffering and not seen and not safe emotionally, oftentimes physically. I think Shauna is my character in the book who I think is on a sexual liberation journey, and she is trying to figure out how are we having experiences with one another physically. There's a scene in the story where her husband has become incredibly analytical about the fertility issues. He's tracking her cervical fluid temperatures in the morning and has a chart. He is keeping track of when she's ovulating. And he even does this thing where after they have the sex, he makes her put her feet up against the wall so he'll stick.
Yes.
And then he goes to Weigel's. Has anybody ever been to Weigel's? Okay, thank you. The best gas station in America. But he goes to Weigel's and gets like a slushie while he waits for it to take.
Yes.
So he's literally seeing her as something, you know, that he is hoping to breed. And that's also where the fetish comes in for him. So I think Shauna also is like, I'm sick of people owning my body. And so she tries to make a decision where she has an experience outside of her marriage with another man, but unfortunately she picks kind of the same man, and I'll leave it at that. So I think she's wrestling with her body and like, what does it mean to be a whole woman, emotionally, spiritually, physically, sexually, and how much of herself is hers. So I think that's where she's at with agency. And I like her. I think sometimes I get annoyed with her, but I like that she has the gall. And she has this beautiful moment where she talks about how her family really wants her to have this biracial child, but they want it to look like Meghan Markle's kid. That's directly from the book.
Yes.
Not too light, not too dark, just right.
Yes.
And she says something on the lines of like, I haven't kept a lot of promises to myself, but I will never bring a daughter into this world.
With a family who hates her.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I respect her for that,
Mhm.
for taking motherhood as seriously as she wants to.
I agree, right? And I think that when I'm thinking of Shauna and when I'm thinking of Nikki, right, I'm thinking about the ways in which these women have been cut off from their wholeness,
Yes.
right, because of the men in their lives. But I think the biggest difference between Shauna and Nikki for me is Shauna's sister, Vanessa.
Yes.
Right. And the ways in which, I mean, family is also just another really kind of complicated and fruitful aspect in this book. Right. But I think that Vanessa is one of the kind of beautiful moments when we're thinking about family's potential for both heal and harm, right? Vanessa very much seems rooted in that healing aspect, right? And can you talk a little bit more about how you see the relationship between Vanessa and Shauna in this book?
Vanessa is the only one with sense and boundaries. That's truly how I feel. She had, what's that book called? No Boundaries, No Peace. She's read it. And she's doing a great job with that. Another reason why I like Vanessa is that she loves her sister enough to hold her accountable and to tell her, like, you don't have to do this. I love you enough to say that you do have agency. You don't have to try to stick with these people who don't like you. You're smarter than this, and I can help you get out of this. And I think Vanessa listens to Shauna. I also like that Shauna is really self-actualized because she comes first in her life. She chooses herself first. And because of that, because she's decided not to have children, she has a job with a pension, and she snowbirds in Rosemary Beach in her RV. She may not always be happy, but she's satisfied in her life. And I love to be able to have a Black character in the book who's like, actually, life is good for me. I don't know if y'all ever been to where Swanee is or the Domain in close to Chattanooga. It's such a beautiful place. Like I just love thinking about her being happy, surrounded by those acres and acres of just natural beauty. So I just love that she has someone who's looking out for her, because Shauna doesn't get a lot of wins. And I think Vanessa is one of the only people who really cares about her. In her family, their parents are very concerned with money and appearances. We already know how John's family is. So I thought their relationship was tender.
I love that. And I agree. I think that Vanessa and Shauna feels like the kind of spiritual example that I kind of want to end on a little bit, right? But I'm paying attention to time. So I have one more question for you. And then I think maybe shifting out to a little more Q&A, right? And the last question that I have for you is kind of a big question, right? But it's something that I've been really thinking about now that I'm a little further away from mother body being in the world, right? And so now I'm shifting that thinking onto you. I'm sorry, right? But essentially, if you have any hopes for the book, right? If you have any dreams of what you would want that book to accomplish, right? As it kind of goes into the hands of our folks in the audience tonight who are either listening in person or online, what do you hope the book accomplishes?
Well, I have a story. I have a story for that perfectly. So the first thing is that this book has already gone beyond anything I could have asked for. And I say this because I dedicate the book to my mom, my grandmother, my great grandmother, and my great I think I said that right. And when my mom asked me, how was it? She's going to read the book. She read Bitch Baby, and she is she's just a more to herself, a reserved woman. So she wasn't crazy about the swearing. But if even my mom can be like, Bitch Baby was powerful, that says something. But she was like, what do you wish happened with the book? And I'm like, it already happened, because your names will be in the Library of Congress, and they will outlive me, and they will outlive all of us, but they're there forever. And so that is powerful. if I could have one wish for this, I think I would hope for intergenerational communication. The other day, somebody came up to me at a reading and she got 2 books, and sometimes people will do that for Christmas gifts. And she said, I'm actually going to read this with my daughter. So she's like, she's getting older, she's 17, and I know she's going through things. I don't have the words. I hope this book will help us.
Wow.
I'm like about to cry.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else I can ask for.
Yeah.
So just conversations, and just women, femmes, anyone who sees themselves in this book can maybe just breathe and feel a little seen, or talk with someone about it. That is more than enough for me.
That's so beautiful and so powerful. Thank you so much. Right. Okay. Switching gears. Questions.
So in going on the theme of shame,
Yeah.
and this might be a very personal question, so please only answer to your comfortability. But when did that exploration start for you, and when did you see it in your writing?
Oh, I think when I got to graduate school, I felt so ashamed all the time. No one knew about my stories. No one had family experiences like me. I had a classmate, I think this was okay. She said one day during a discussion, she said, I don't see the problem with me admitting that I don't find Black people attractive. Okay, so what else am I going to do but be floored with shame, right? So I knew that I wanted to write about shame because I know so many women of color struggle with it, but also writing about shame with resistance. It's powerful when we write about the things that shame us because they no longer hold us in bondage. And so probably in graduate school, and I guess, can I say a swear word?
I already did.
I guess when I wrote this book, I kind of was like, and fuck you,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, thank you.
I kind of love how much of like grad school ends up being just like the kind of petty fuel you need to just give out the biggest F you, right? May the book go long and far, right? And so that'd be the biggest, pettiest F you ever. I love it, right? Other questions?
Yes. Can you tell us the process of how you said this was your dissertation in grad school, into turning it into a book?
I can. Thank you for asking me that. I got to work with Jonathan Rabb at SCAD, and he was incredible, and he really pushed me. And so he read 2 of the stories in the collection, and he was like, I think we have some work to do, but I know we can do it. And so I got to work with him, and that was a delight. But I actually only kept half the stories from the thesis, and the rest were new. And I think part of that was really liberating because, you know, they need more time. The oldest story in this book is 7 or 8 years old, you know, so sometimes stories are going to take you years. So I kept writing, I kept reading. And then I wrote the second half of the book actually living here. I worked at Warren Wilson for a long time. Some of my former colleagues are here that I loved dearly. And I also would annoy them with my obnoxious singing in the office. But I would work at the college during the day, take a walk on the farm at night, eat at the dining hall because it was really cheap, and write in the library after work. And so that place just held me. So it was a combination of those things. It was the thesis, taking what worked. One of the stories from the thesis won the Oxford American Prize, and then repeating that formula to make new stories. So thank you.
So we have a couple questions from folks at home. Okay. First one is from Jennifer, who says, and she doesn't say who it's for, but I think this is good for both of you. Could you share a book that made you feel safe?
Yeah,
I can.
do you want to take it first? Do you want me to take it first?
You go
Okay, I tell everybody that the book that made me feel seen was Danica Kelly's Bestiary collection of poetry, her Davy collection. And it was the first time that I felt seen not only in its pages and the ways that it was reckoning with trauma and self-love, right? And kind of defining that, but also in who I wanted to be as a writer. It was very much the first time that I saw all of these things that I was striving for poetry to do really kind of amalgamated on the page. So that was the book that was a real reckoning for me.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Weren't they here recently?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
That was a good one. For me, I have two. The book that just held me and continues to is Woman Hollering Creek by Sandra Cisneros. Doesn't get much better than that. And then it is The New Testament by Jericho Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I will catch up with you in the chat for those too. So we'll have the links. But the next question from Adam, this is from Spike, who also sends a lot of love. For both Halle and Diamond, what have been sources of joy for y'all? Whether influences tied directly to your creative processes or general outlets?
I love this question because I love talking about joy because we don't get enough joy. I shove joy in my students' throats all the time. I'm going to be the joy professor. God help me. So things that bring me joy. The thing that comes up immediately is my dog, and in particular, she makes the little like whistle sound she makes when she breathes. She's like a Shih Tzu mix, so she's like the flat-faced thing, and God bless her, breathing is not her strong suit. But like that beautiful little whistle noise, right, is like that confirmation that she's alive and fighting, right? And I've learned to just really love that noise and just sitting close to her and listening to that, right? Other things that bring me joy, cooking. I love cooking. I love the joy of sharing food with other people and seeing them enjoy that. I love video games. I love good books like Good Women. I love I have a love-hate relationship with poetry, right? I feel like I read poems and they simultaneously break me and build me up, right? And I'm really grateful for that. I'll probably think of other things that bring me joy in a second, but what about you?
Okay, I like Sister Wives. That brings me a lot of joy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love TV time. I love the couch. After I'm working, it's just delicious.
Yes.
The other thing that brings me joy, I love Sylvan Esso. And so I love listening to them, and I like to dance around to them in my house. And let's see, I like to talk to my mom on the phone. So those things bring me a lot of joy.
You've motivated me to like remove shame for a second and confess that I deeply love Jersey Shore. Every once in a while, I've spent enough distance from it that I'm like, you know what, I should rewatch again that entire first season of Jersey Shore.
Yeah.
And it ages both terribly and so well. So well.
Nice pick. Nice pick. I like Jersey Shore too. And I like when they do like the family reunion in Italy.
Oh yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah.
I like that too. Thank you, Spike, for that question.
Hallie, can you do me a favor and just repeat your second book that you gave us?
Yes, it's the New Testament. It is the New Testament, right? It's not the Old Testament. It's the New Testament by Jericho Brown. All his collections are good. The Tradition, I think he has one called Please. Every single one of them is wonderful.
Any more questions from the folks in the store?
I can tell just reading the speed of article. Which one was the most difficult?
The most difficult story is the most important one to me. And it's a story called Her Last Time in Dothan. and a young girl who is nameless in the whole story is going through the process of watching her mother lose her mother. And so she's experiencing dementia for the first time. She is grappling with her family, her nuclear family becoming wealthy while her extended family struggles in poverty. And there's nothing she can do because she's 12. And she's struggling with loving her grandmother, but knowing that the time isn't going to go backward, right? Like her grandmother is more close to becoming an ancestor than a viable, vibrant grandmother. Like it's time for her to pass to whatever comes next. And so that is a hard story for me because I knew that the girl couldn't be named and she would rarely get to speak. But that was the only way I could tell that story. And while most of the stories are maybe 10 to 20% personal, that one is more of 80 because specifically about the dementia piece, I'll say that. The rest is creativity. I lost my great-grandmother to dementia, and I had to watch my mother go through that process, and it was really hard. And so I wrote that in honor of her.
Thank you. I think I have maybe the last question, maybe, unless there's one in the chat.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
And it's a pretty typical question, I think, for kind of closing out these things. Kind of moving forward, thinking about looking forward, right? And acknowledging that the answer could literally just be, I'm being still right now. But where do you think writing is going from here for you? What kinds of projects do you imagine for the future? Where do you want to go next, ideally?
Well, I definitely am resting, right? Because you have to fill it back up. And I don't believe any book is worth me writing that's going to take me less than, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, right? So there's time. And, sister wives, as I said. But I love the research part of this book. My background is in the humanities. So anything where I get to learn about something and dive into the archives or talk with people about their experiences on the phone or talk to locals interests me. So I won't say too much about my next project because if I talk about it, I won't do it. But I'm really excited to do some more research and just writing lets you be a nerd, but people think you're cool. So I'm excited to keep nerding out.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What about you?
Me? Oh, yes, I should answer my own question. Right now, a project that I'm working on is I'm thinking a lot about my Southern identity and major influences on that. And I'm recognizing that Outcast was like pretty much the biggest entry to me, like learning to like love myself as a Southerner. And now that I am a grown ass woman, looking back at the lyrics and being like, oh, those songs weren't really meant for me, right? And kind of so, but that still doesn't change the impact that it had on who I am. So I'm kind of teasing out those tensions a little bit through poetry. And it's a lot of fun. It's really exciting. I want to keep doing that.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Halle and Diamond, thank you both so much.